Hello, and welcome to the Warfighter Wire, our weekly review of the U.S. Department of Defense and U.S. military branches. This week, from July 6th to July 12th, 2025, we witnessed a significant shift across the armed forces, a clear and decisive move from strategic planning to large scale operational reality. What we saw was not just a series of isolated events, but a convergence of activities demonstrating a department wide focus on preparing for high end, technologically advanced conflict. We'll break this down by looking at the overarching news, then diving into specifics for each service branch. So let's get started. Four major themes defined the strategic landscape this week. First and foremost was the Indo Pacific strategy in full motion. For years, the pivot to the Pacific has been a central talking point of U.S. defense policy. This week, it became tangibly real. The Department of the Air Force and the Space Force launched their largest ever exercise in the region, Resolute Force Pacific 25 and Resolute Space 25. These weren't just drills, they were full scale rehearsals of core U.S. warfighting concepts involving hundreds of aircraft, thousands of personnel, and critical allied partners. This is the national defense strategy playing out in real time on a massive scale. The second theme was the budgetary bedrock being laid to support this strategic pivot. The House Appropriations Committee approved the fiscal year 2026 Defense Appropriations Act. This bill is the financial engine for the strategy, and its contents are revealing. It allocates significant funding for next generation systems like sixth generation aircraft. It continues the modernization of the nuclear triad. It invests heavily in unmanned systems, and it funds a layered missile defense shield. These aren't random line items, they are direct reflections of the Pentagon's priorities. It is worth noting, however, that the bill also includes several contentious policy riders on social issues, which highlights the complex political environment the DoD must navigate to secure its funding. The third major development was a revolution in drone warfare policy. A new Pentagon memorandum and complementary executive order have fundamentally altered how the military acquires and classifies small unmanned aerial systems, or UAS. Drones in Group 1 and 2, the smaller and more tactical systems, are now reclassified as consumables, much like ammunition. This is a profound shift. It decentralizes procurement authority down to the lower level commanders, empowering them to buy what they need when they need it. This policy is a direct lesson learned from modern conflicts like the war in Ukraine, where the ability to rapidly field and adapt to drone technology has been a decisive factor. This move signals a strategic pivot towards a more distributed and democratized form of tactical air power. Finally, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, demonstrated a mature innovation strategy. While the services are busy fielding today's cutting edge technology, DARPA is already working to counter the vulnerabilities of those very systems. We saw this with the initiatives like the Coffee program, which tackles the problem of battlefield spectrum congestion, and the SABRE program, which is designed to find weakness in our own artificial intelligence. This shows a forward looking approach, a commitment to future proofing the force to ensure a resilient and sustainable technological advantage. Now let's look closer at the Department of the Air Force. On July 10th, the Air Force kicked off Resolute Force Pacific 25, or REFORPAC 25. This is the largest ever contingency response exercise, scheduled to run until August 8th. We are talking about over 300 aircraft and thousands of personnel from the US and allied nations, operating from dispersed locations across the Pacific, including Japan, Guam, and Hawaii. The core concept being tested here is Agile Combat Employment, or ACE. The ACE doctrine is the Air Force's answer to the vulnerability of large centralized bases. In a potential conflict, these massive bases are obvious targets. ACE seeks to mitigate that risk by dispersing air power to smaller, more austere airfields. REFORPAC 25 is a live fire stress test of this concept. It involves everything from hot pit refueling, refueling an aircraft while its engines are still running to get back in the air faster, to managing logistics and command and control across vast and contested areas. At the same time, the Air Force is grappling with a strategic tension between modernization and current readiness. A new wave of upgraded F 16s just arrived at Osan Air Base in South Korea to bolster immediate combat capability. Meanwhile, at Eglin Air Force Base, the Air Force Battle Lab completed a major experiment, flying autonomous, collaborative platforms alongside crewed fighter jets, a landmark step in human machine teaming. This highlights the central challenge. How do you balance funding for proven platforms that you need right now, like the F 16 and the F 35, with the critical investment required for the revolutionary but not yet fielded capabilities of the future, like AI and autonomy? This debate was underscored by a group of 16 retired 4-star generals who publicly urged Congress this week to increase the F 35A procurement and restore funding for the E 7 Wedgetail, arguing for the importance of credible fielding systems. Turning to the seas, the Department of the Navy and the Marine Corps had a clear focus on global presence and partner integration. A look at the global fleet posture shows a heavy concentration of forces in two key regions. In the Indo Pacific, the USS George Washington Carrier Group was operating in the South China Sea, while the amphibious assault ship USS America and the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit were in the Coral Sea. In the Middle East, the U.S. maintained a powerful presence with two carrier strike groups led by USS Carl Vinson and USS Nimitz, augmented by destroyers in the Red Sea. In Europe, the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group was conducting deterrence operations. And in demonstration of soft power, the hospital ship USNS Comfort was on a humanitarian mission in Ecuador. There was a specifically strong focus on the Philippines. This engagement is happening on two levels simultaneously. At the strategic level, U.S. and Philippine Marines co hosted the Pacific Amphibious Leaders Symposium in Manila, bringing together military leaders from 23 nations to build trust and high level coordination. At the tactical level, U.S. and Philippine Marines were on the ground in Palawan for a bilateral, archipelagic coastal defense exercise, practicing the hands on skills of literal warfare, from jungle patrols to coastal defense. This two pronged approach is designed to build a network of allied capability enabling partners to effectively defend their own territory. However, a shadow hangs over the Navy's future readiness, a critical shipbuilding crisis. This week, the Navy accepted delivery of the final Independence variant littoral combat ship, the USS Pierre, closing a chapter on a controversial program. But more concerning are the significant delays in future cornerstone programs. The next two American class amphibious assault ships are each delayed by a year. And critically, the next Ford class aircraft carrier, the USS John F. Kennedy, is now delayed by more than 2 years. This delay will cause the carrier fleet to temporarily drop to just 10 ships, creating a potential gap between the Navy's strategic goals and its industrial capacity to meet them. In the space domain, the U.S. Space Force also made headlines. On July 8th, it launched its largest ever exercise, Resolute Space 25. With over 700 Guardians participating, this exercise is tightly integrated with the Air Force's REFORPAC. Its stated purpose is to test operations in a contested dynamic environment against high end threats. The key phrase here is orbital warfare. This signals a significant evolution in military space doctrine. The focus is shifting from simply providing services from space like GPS and communications to being prepared to actively fight in space to defend those assets. The exercise is designed to validate these new warfighting concepts and send a clear deterrent message to potential adversaries that U.S. space capabilities are not undefended targets. However, a significant policy contradiction emerged this week that could undermine these efforts. Even as the Space Force practices space domain awareness as a critical warfighting task, the administration's FY 2026 budget request proposes to completely eliminate funding for NOAA's Traffic Coordination System for Space, known as TRACSS. This is the primary civilian tool for space traffic management. This move creates a major disconnect. It's difficult to ensure military dominance in a domain while simultaneously cutting the foundational tool for basic safety and sustainability in the same domain. The U.S. Army's activities this week highlighted its foundational role as the sustainer of the joint force. While the Air Force and the Navy were projecting power, the Army was focused on the essential and often less visible work of infrastructure and logistics. We saw several major contracts awarded: a $17.3 million contract for a new vehicle and aircraft maintenance facility for the Army National Guard in Wyoming, a $12.9 million contract modification for civil works on the Tule River spillway in California, and $13.6 million contract for training support services. This is the bedrock upon which large scale joint operations are built. The Army also celebrated its 250th anniversary with events culminating in a grand military parade in Washington, D.C. While intended as a celebration of service, the event drew significant public commentary, with some veterans and citizens expressing concern that the anniversary was being politicized and that focus should remain on the issues like veteran support. Army units stationed overseas, such as those in Germany, also held their own celebrations to mark this historic milestone. Finally, let's look at the future with Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, or DARPA. DARPA's work this week provides a fascinating glimpse into how the military is trying to stay ahead of the curve. A great example is the COFFEE program, which stands for Compact Front End Filters at the Element Level. The program is developing ultra compact radio frequency filters that can be integrated directly into advanced antenna arrays. The problem it's trying to solve is spectrum fratricide, the risk of our own communications, radar, and electronic warfare systems interfering with each other on an increasingly crowded battlefield. By developing these tiny filters, DARPA hopes to allow military and commercial systems like 6G to operate in close proximity without conflict. This is a proactive hedge against a future strategic vulnerability. Overall, DARPA's portfolio this week revealed a triad of innovation. First, it's working to secure our AI with the SABRE program, which is establishing an expert AI red team to find vulnerabilities in battlefield AI systems. Second, it's using AI for defense, with the AI Cyber Challenge aiming to create AI systems that can automatically find and fix software bugs. And third, it's working to revolutionize logistics with a $6.3 million grant for the Rubble to Rockets project. This ambitious project aims to develop a process for 3D printing functional parts from scrapped metal in a contested environment. This strategy thinks several moves ahead. As the service as the services rely on vulnerable supply chains, DARPA is working on how to eliminate them. So to summarize, this week was a microcosm of the entire US military in transition. We saw a massive real-world execution of the Indo-Pacific strategy, backed by a focused budget and a revolutionary new drone policy. At the same time, we saw the services grappling with the hard choices of modernization and the ever present challenges of shipbuilding and policy consistency. And looking over the horizon, we saw DARPA already working to solve the problems of tomorrow. It was a week that clearly demonstrated the immense complexity, capability, and strategic direction of the U.S. Department of Defense. Thanks for watching. That is all for this week, and we will see you next time.